Hello and welcome to Starside Cafe. Today we're going to talk about the 1995 film Hackers. And joining me to discuss the movie is Aaron Capo.
Hello! It's been a while since we've done a Starside Flicks.
It has been some time, and this one we're not even doing a modern movie. I thought it would be fun to do like sort of a retro review type of a thing. But spoilers, you love this movie.
Zach, this is my favorite movie of all time. I unironically love this movie.
Well, I had actually never seen it, so it's almost like blind spotting, but for movies. But like I'm just catching up with it. But anyway, if you haven't seen it, we're gonna spoil pretty much all of it.
Yes, you should go watch it before watching it.
Yeah, we're gonna go into detail, and then so watch it, and then come back and listen to this maybe, but. The film is sort of a digital heist movie that follows a character called Dade Murphy, played by Johnny Lee Miller, who at the age of 11 brought about a global financial crisis by crashing computers on Wall Street. His punishment was being banned from the use of computers and phones until his 18th birthday. Around the time he turns 18, he and his mother move to New York City and he attends a new school. He also gets back to hacking and soon discovers a group of aspiring computer hackers that attend his new school. Among them is an attractive girl named Kate, played by Angelina Jolie, whose talent for hacking rivals his own. And while they begin as rivals, they're soon forced to work together when one of their friends gets into some hot water after hacking into a mineral company's supercomputer and illegally downloading a garbage file, which is very complicated. We'll get into that. But the company's cybersecurity man, Eugene, the Plague Belford, played by Fisher Stevens, realizes that the garbage file actually contains a malware program he inserted in order to defraud the company. So to cover his tracks, Eugene inserts a virus that will remotely capsize the company's oil tankers and blames the virus on the group of high school hackers. The company sends the U.S. Secret Service after Dade and his friends, so in order to prove their innocence, incriminate Eugene, and stop the oil tankers from capsizing, the group work together in a crazy computer battle to out-hack Eugene. And that sounds pretty insane, and it's kind of a lot. I don't know, how did this hold up? Is it nostalgia, or do you think it holds up?
You know, I don't really know. When I saw it as a child, I was like, man, everything about this is talking to me. This is great. I think I told you when I got my first generation or whatever generation iPod was able to put videos on it, the only video I had on my iPod was Hackers. And I would just like, in high school, I would just like call it up and be watching Hackers like in between classes because it was so good. Like everything about it is great. I struggle to find flaws with it. I own the novelization of this movie that came out after the movie and is not great. Like, I don't think they edited it a ton because there's like a couple of scenes in the book where characters who aren't in the scene start talking. They are just like, it's very lazily written. Yeah, it's weird. And also, like, there's a subplot in this one where Lord Nikon has a photographic memory, but then in the book he does that, but they then attribute it to someone else because it's just very sloppily written. But it has a cool cover. And as a teen, when I was reading it, I was like, oh man, like this is so good. They just like go in depth on some of the scenes, and I was for a while like really wanted to write like not a sequel, but sort of like something in the same vein as this, where like college kids are hacking, and I don't know, the whole environment of this movie, just like 90s New York where anything is possible, is like very attractive to me.
It is very cool. I think it's very well shot. There's like a lot of these like New York City shots that are very cool, like sort of flying around the city. And I remember like towards the beginning, it actually does this thing where it's like flying around New York City, and then it becomes like, it's sort of almost a drone shot, sort of looking down at the streets. So you see this like grid of streets, and then that kind of turns into this like sort of computer architecture type of a thing.
It's so good. That's such a good shot.
Yeah, it was a great shot. there are flaws to this movie. I don't think it's perfect, but I'm kind of with you on like really kind of digging how like 90s this movie is. I think it might just be nostalgia for like that time, and that's sort of making me like it more than maybe somebody who's just now watching it like today, and they don't necessarily have a nostalgia for like that time period. But
you're right. I mean, I would describe this movie as aggressively 90s.
it is the most 90s movie that I can think of right now.
Just like I wanted to be in the room that they were in when they were thinking about like what everyone was going to wear, because they were like, man, what do teen hackers wear? And it is insane. Like he goes to a party at one point and he's just wearing a life vest for no reason.
Yeah, and doesn't he have like his shirt is like cut off somewhere in the middle so you can like like who does that? Nobody outside of the 90s did that.
Probably the craziest person is Serial, played by Matthew Lillard.
Yeah. That's how you know this is a 90s movie, because Matthew Lillard is in it.
And he is dressed in the most... like, he's either wearing 18 layers of different coats, or he's wearing basically Lilu's outfit from The Fifth Element, kind of, with those crazy suspenders.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's true.
Remember that scene where they were in class and he had those insane suspenders on? And he's always wearing, like, weird... His hair is always in, like, 5 pigtails, and he's wearing small glasses.
Like, braided pigtails, and, he's wearing glasses.
He is crazy. But, like, I don't know what it is about this, because it's kind of like... A little bit, it's like the plot of an anime, where, like, there was this savant child... But then he is forced to not do the thing he's a savant at for years, but he's in the background still learning about it. It's like a golf anime or something, where like some kid wasn't able to play golf, but then in his backyard he's been doing all these special tricks for years. And then he finally comes to high school and he gets on the high school golf team, and he's like this crazy pro, and everyone's like, oh my God. It's like very similar. It's like if there was a hacking anime, I would love that anime, and I think we should write it. But
we should do that.
I love that storytelling technique of a guy who's coming into a situation and he's constantly like impressing everybody because like he's been training for years, sort of like a Goku situation, if we want to go back to anime.
Well, but he hasn't even necessarily been training for years, because he was like banned from hacking or using computers or phones even until he was like 18.
Well, so they go into this in the book.
He has this like innate ability to do it, I guess.
What they explain in the book, and you can kind of see it in the movie, like remember that scene where they're hanging out at, first of all, eventually we're going to talk about Cyberdelia, which is insane. But they're hanging out at Cyberdelia, and Serial has like all these books he's pulling out, and these are all the reference books they use to hack, like the Big Red Book and other such and such things. So while he can't touch computers, he's been like drilling in like Unix environments and things into his mind. Like on paper, he's aware of all these hacking techniques, so that when he finally touches a computer, it's like he has all this stored knowledge that he's able to use because he's memorized all these databanks and all these like IP addresses and whatnot.
Which, by the way, that first scene when he first starts hacking again, and he like hacks that TV station, and you don't know it at the time, but he's like sort of going up against what's her name, Angelina Jolie's character. Yeah, and like it's sort of visualized by these two robots like fighting over a beta tape, like because they're both trying to hack whatever that station is like outputting at the time, because they want to watch something different than what's actually on that station. And so they're trying to hack it, and apparently how that TV station works is they just have this robot that just like rolls around and like grabs beta tapes off of like a shelf and like sticks them in a player. But there's apparently two robots, and these two hackers like get control of the two different robots. Just like the visualization is something that's like crazy, and like that's not how anything works, but you have to like the challenge with a movie like this is you have to come up with some sort of visually creative, interesting way to show somebody sitting at a computer just like typing away, basically, because that's not visually interesting, but you have to make it interesting. And that's why it doesn't look like anything resembling reality. And yet, like, the battle towards the end ends up sort of looking like sort of a dogfight through like this crazy sort of spacey virtual like plane.
Well, and that's also a symptom of this being 1995 and like the general public not understanding
computers
what
at
computers
all.
are.
Yeah.
Like this is like maybe pre AOL even. I'm not even sure. But like the fact that all of their UI on their computers just looks like insane nonsense. Like the average
like no
person would be
operating
like,
system ever.
Exactly. It's just like big words that say like hack ? And then they just hit Y for yes.
Hack now or cancel? Hack now. It's like
it's so good.
But I mean, I also like the relationship stuff, like the high school aspect of it. It doesn't feel like other more cliche like 90s romance stuff, but it does also like, it's kind of one of those things where she has a boyfriend already for like half the movie, and then he just sort of doesn't appear in the movie the rest of the time. You're like, what happened
speaking
there?
of that, speaking of things that only happen in the first part of the movie, there is one flaw with this movie that I will acknowledge, and that is in the beginning of the movie they do this thing where there's these jump cuts to like old footage from old movies. Like, for instance, he's like mad at the girl at one point and he's like looking at her, and then it goes like staticky, and then it shows like an old movie of like a man strangling a woman, and then it statics back. And that just stops happening like 15 minutes into the movie. They just forgot about that.
It was like a stylistic flourish that they were like, oh, we definitely need to do this. And so they started doing that, and then they just like forgot about it, or
like during that
moved on to
hacking
something
battle
else.
you were talking about when they were messing with the beta tapes. There was a ton of that like quick cuts of like people, like it would be the machines moving and then cut to like a guy with a rapier in an old movie, like jousting or whatever. And then cut back to them, and it was an interesting thing, but then it just kind of trailed off once the real story started up.
Yeah. Well, wasn't that partially because like the thing he put into play was like some old movie? But I guess
that could be. I mean, there's a very subtly that he's very into old cinema based on that scene and based on those like things he's thinking about. But then that sort of trails off, I think, after the pool scene, pretty much. Like that doesn't happen again.
Yeah, I guess that's true. But yeah, that is sort of the challenge, is how do you visualize hacking, especially for a culture that at the time probably didn't know what computers look like, or like the internet or any of that. So this was probably considered fairly cutting edge, although I guess they probably knew that this is not what anything looked like.
And he does, so like, the hacking has always been interesting to me, especially in like a 90s setting when computers were just getting off, just because it gives you almost magic powers. Like he does a thing early on where he puts himself in all of Kate Libby's classes just by like hacking into the school's computer system. Yeah. Like it gives you this mobility sort of, like there's another part where they just like, oh, we're going to hack all of the stoplights in seemingly all of New York, and then turn them all to green just to like create... I mean, it's basically Watch Dogs is what it is.
Yeah. Watch Dogs, I feel like, has probably taken a lot from like that movie, but...
I mean, especially Watch Dogs 2, which is basically Hackers 2. There's literally a part in Watch Dogs 2 where you hack the planet.
Yeah, can we talk about that? Like, just how bonkers it is that there's a TV show in this world called Hack the Planet, where these like...
Isn't that crazy?
These two hackers basically are teaching people how to cheat the system and like steal telephone companies, like basically stealing from the telephone companies.
So I think this is based on an event. Have we ever talked about this? The Max Headroom incident?
I don't think we've talked about it.
So in 1987, November 22nd, 1987... in the Chicago area, somebody hacked the TV station, or like one of the channels on or two TV stations, and it was just this man in a rubber Max Headroom, or I don't know if it was a man actually, but it was someone in a Max Headroom mask, and they hacked the planet. They hacked the TV stations and sort of took over, and no one ever figured out who it was. And they couldn't figure out how he did it either. But for 2 hours, it was just this guy on this crazy set with a Max Headroom mask on. And everyone was like, this is insane. Why is this happening? And no one ever talks about it now. But I'm pretty sure that's what it was based off of. But it's something like that, where these two weird guys with like painted white faces have this like underground, basically public access thing, which I thought was cool. They have a robot arm with a gun on it as well, I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, for that, as far as that like Max Headroom thing goes, I feel like every time in a movie, like that happens a lot in like 80s and 90s movies where like some bad guy like takes over control of like the TV stations to like, and they're just on every station or whatever. But,
it happened in Man of Steel, which is a terrible movie.
It's still happening. Yeah. Maybe they're all inspired by that one thing or one time that happened. But yeah, it's also crazy that like the most common passwords are love, sex, secret, and God. Like those are the 4 most common passwords.
That is a good point. They do strive to put in some like legitimate hacking things in this. Like that's true. The thing with the Phantom Freak, the Freaker.
Speaking of which, I don't. You haven't played Persona 5, but they're called the Phantom Thieves, and they're like essentially hacking a person. Like they're, and so like that made me think. Like when I was watching this movie, I was like, oh, maybe Persona 5 was like inspired by hackers.
It very well could be. So Freak, his whole thing is telephones, and he does a real thing where he's like recording tones, because that was like the beginnings of hacking, is people realized when you put quarters into phones, it made a tone on the phone line, and that's how it was all like it decided how much time to give you and other things. So people would record the tones and then they would just get free calls, or there was a specific whistle you could get from a Captain Crunch cereal box, and if you blew that whistle in special ways, you could just like get access to like routing networks and just like get free calls. And that was like the early days of hacking, which I thought was cool that they included.
Yeah, that is interesting stuff.
But anyway, back to like the plot. So Johnny, it's like a kid and he crashes a bunch of systems, and it's like a funny kind of like there's like a SWAT team going in the beginning, and then it cuts to the courtroom, and there's like a slow pan over the defendants, and then you tilt down, and it's a kid with like a very gelled hair. And then Felicity Huffman is there for some reason as the lawyer. But then 18 years pass, or however many years pass, and he's 18, and he goes to New York, and he meets up with all these other, like, from where he was probably like the only person who was into computers. But then you go to New York, and he meets this like group of like-minded people, and they invite him to a place I really wanted to go when I was a kid, this club Cyberdelia, which I guess is all ages. Like, he's in high school. They're all in high school, but they're allowed to just like chill out at this place and like order fries. And there's like a huge arcade game that takes up an entire wall. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, it kind of made me think of that like place, what's it called, in like Tron, where they go.
Yeah. Like cool areas like that. Like New York is just like thinking about New York in the 90s, or even like watching Broad City these days. It's just like a crazy place because subways can get you anywhere. So you don't need a car, and you can just traverse the entire city. So even when you're a kid, like high school kids in New York are just like going around. Like they're not just going to school and back to their house. They're traversing the entire city in minutes because of like they are learning the subway systems, and it just seems like a really crazy place to grow up.
Yeah, you do have like more accessibility just through public transportation to like go anywhere. Like in more rural towns, like you and I probably grew up in, we're like lucky to get to the mall if somebody drove us, or if like somebody we knew in high school had a car. But like, yeah, mostly it was school and back home again.
Something else we should talk about. So they all dress really crazily. Also, do you know how you can tell if someone is a hacker?
How?
They rollerblade.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's so much rollerblading in this movie, which is how you know this was made in the 90s if you didn't know otherwise. But
and it's a real bummer that rollerblading in real life is like very not well looked upon, because it seems very cool in this movie, and it's like a cool way to get around. They're always like slinging them over their shoulder, and they have like cool pads on and stuff. It's just it was a cool idea to have them all be like very mobile with these wheeled shoes of the future.
I mean, when I was a kid in the 90s, I loved rollerblading. I thought it was like the coolest thing ever. So like, if you were going to make a movie about like teenagers in the 90s, they had to be on rollerblades at some point. So
unless you're a bad hacker, in which case you skateboard.
Yeah, that too.
That was like a laughable. That's one of the only times I like laugh at something that I think is unintentionally funny in this movie is when he goes to meet up with the Plague, and for no reason, the Plague is just like skitching on the back of a car on his skateboard and just like grabs the floppy disk from Dade and then just like keeps skitching.
Yeah, well,
and it's meant to be like a really dramatic scene. Like there's very sad music playing because Dade is like betraying his friends, but then Fisher Stevens is just like crouched behind a car with a leather jacket on. He just like comes up and he's like, "Thanks."
Well, I feel like this is also like pretty inspired by like 80s movies, because you have that, which is very like Back to the Future, you know.
That's true.
That's what Marty McFly did, but you also like a lot of it feels somewhat akin. It's like kind of a 90s War Games type of a movie. Yeah. That has to do with like high school kids, but he's also sort of a hacker or whatever, but he plays games, and he ends up getting involved in this game that's like way over his head or whatever. It's kind of a similar deal, it feels like.
Well, let's talk about the worst actor in this movie. Do you know who I'm going to say?
Penn from Penn and Teller fame?
I thought he was fine.
Okay, I'm just like throwing out names at this point.
He was just like, he's perpetually surprised by things. But no, I'm talking about, I don't remember her name. I've seen this movie probably 30 or 50 times. The corporate lady who is always like giving the business to the Plague.
Oh, yeah.
Her performance is just insane. Like, I think a lot of it is ADR for whatever reason, but there's a lot of things where she's just like turning around. She's like, "Get it done, Eugene," and it's just like very wooden to me.
Like I didn't think much of it at the time, but definitely I noticed that a lot of like the scenes with her in it in particular feel like they were ADR'd, and I don't know if it was like a thing where they're like, "Nah, her voice is terrible. Let's have somebody else re-record these lines, and we'll just leave her like physically in the movie."
Yeah, I don't know. Like I could maybe see there's that one scene where they're in that crowded office building, but a lot of her scenes are just like in a very quiet office. So I'm like, there wasn't any like sound getting in the way of this. Did they just hate her voice? I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, the first time I noticed it, I think they were in a public place on like an escalator or whatever. So I was like, well, I can guess maybe you probably needed it for this scene. But then I started noticing it in other scenes. I was like, oh, this is just like going to happen every time they're on screen.
So he starts hanging out with these people, and he immediately starts up a rivalry with Acid Burn because of that time he was like messing around with that TV station. Here's a great thing, a thing that I love, Zach. I don't know if we've talked about this, but I love when someone has a secret in a movie, specifically a romantic comedy where someone has a secret. If they're a time traveler,
you've mentioned
or if they're Santa Claus,
a few times.
That's great.
Yeah. Surprise, I'm Santa.
That's the best. That and time travel are two of the best things you can reveal to someone who's in love with you.
I feel like that's not something people would believe.
Well, no, I'm in the setting of a romantic comedy, I mean.
Oh, sure.
Anyway, nobody knows. This is another part that is probably not realistic because he is this kid who crashed all these systems. He's a famous hacker, but nobody knows that his name is actually Dade Murphy. Like, there's a scene where it's revealed that he's Zero Cool. He starts going by Crash Override when he's hacking, like, for his new identity. But towards the end of the movie, he's like, "I'm actually Zero Cool." And everyone in the room is like, "Oh my God, you're Zero Cool? This is crazy."
Yeah.
But like, they're all hackers. They're all skilled at getting information they shouldn't get. How did none of them associate Dade Murphy with Zero Cool? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, like all the
one of the
news
guys was
reports were...
Yeah, so the guy with the like photographic memory was like, he like goes through all the stuff that he did, and he's like, "Man, that's crazy. I always thought you were black." But like, that's an insane thing to say. Like all of the newspapers
Yeah.
should have said like 13-year-old Dade Murphy. Like,
Here's
how
a
did they
picture of him.
Yeah, exactly. There probably were multiple pictures of him. It's like, did they put him in the witness protection program or something? It doesn't make any sense.
That's true. That is a weird thing that I didn't even think about. But especially, yeah, if they're going to specifically state that a character has a photographic memory, they should probably, he at least knows who he is. And so maybe he's like the contact on the inside that knows his secret or whatever. That would have made more sense, But
anyway, so he starts going by Crash Override, so no one knows that he's actually like a super elite hacker. And then him and Kate have this rivalry because they initially butted heads. And also, Kate did a practical joke on him where she brought him up. She like, oh, check out the roof. There's like a pool on the roof.
yeah, I liked that as a thing where the rivalry aspects in like the first half of the movie, like set in the high school, was like the thing that initially got me into the movie. I was like, I'm enjoying this aspect of it.
It was a weird point system because they were like, eventually they're like, let's make this an official duel. But I couldn't figure out what like the points were. But it was basically all around. A guy we haven't talked about yet is Agent Gill, who is this FBI agent who is anti-hacking but doesn't know anything about technology, but he's the public face of like the government's anti-hacking initiative. And so they decide, since he's based out of New York, the rules of this thing were basically like, let's mess with this guy and like more and more and more, and then whoever does it the best wins. And so they like put his name into like classifieds, and they like cancel his credit cards and all these things like that. And there's a big hacking montage where they're basically like really screwing this guy over. Also, did you recognize his second in command?
No, who was it?
That's Mark Anthony.
Is it really?
Yeah.
I didn't even notice that.
There's also a weird thing, and I didn't notice it until like the maybe fifth time I saw the movie. But so Mark Anthony, he's the guy who's like reading that manifesto. He's like, they're like parked outside of someone's house, and him and another guy are in a car. And then he's like, listen to this manifesto. And he like reads this hacker creed about how they don't have race and they just seek information. He's like, isn't this cool? And the other guy's like, sounds like commie nonsense or something. But anyway, that's your introduction to him, where it's revealed that like he's into computers very subtly. And then in that party scene where they go to Kate Libby's house and everyone's having a party, there's like one shot where he's like in the foreground just like wearing sunglasses, and he like tips the sunglasses down like he's like looking around. And I'm not sure if that's meant to mean that he's spying on them or he just like enjoys going to high school parties, but it's a weird thing to include.
Yeah, I think I noticed that. I was like, why is that guy there?
Yeah.
I was like, what is
and
this
that party
about?
scene is very cool as well. Like, it's very New York, where it's like she has like basically a penthouse because her mom is super rich. So after the party is fading, there's like a cool balcony shot and like a cool shot of New York and stuff. It's just a very cool atmosphere throughout this entire movie.
Yeah, and the music helps with that a lot. The music's pretty great in this movie.
When I was a child, I thought there was a sequel and a third version of this, or like a trequel. What is a sequel of a sequel called? Is there a name for that?
Sequel of a sequel? Just a trilogy.
I thought this was a trilogy because they released 3 soundtracks to this movie. I have the first one, but there's Hackers Squared and Hackers Cubed.
Wait, what?
Yeah, so there's 3 different soundtracks to this movie, and I think the other 2 are just inspired from the original motion picture. But when I saw that, I was like, oh my god, this is the soundtrack to Hackers 2, and this is the soundtrack to Hackers 3. And then I would come to realize that it was just 3 soundtracks for the same movie.
Like,
the music
where's
is
the other
great.
2 movies?
Yeah, I would love it if there were 2 more. But yeah, the soundtrack is really great. The set design is insane. And the costuming is also just like next level crazy.
Yeah, the costume set design and just like we've talked about it before, just like the city, and then like the special effects, just how they sort of visualize the hacking. They went all out for it. I'll say that, even though I don't think it was super clear what was going on during that like hacker battle towards the end. Like, I found it kind of hard to follow because they're all like shouting buzzwords that didn't mean anything, but they're also
Well, I think those buzzwords did mean things. Those were pulled, that's like actual stuff that does happen, but it was illustrated in such a way that it would never appear. Like, there are viruses that just like self-replicate over and over again, and the way to solve them is
I don't mean those, but they were just like, I forget what specifically they were, but they were like saying stuff. I was like, I'm pretty sure that's not a thing. You're just saying it right now. Like, for sure, like the worms and the viruses that they're referring to, those are real things. But like, I noticed it mostly when it would cut to Fisher Stevens' character, because he would be like yelling instructions at like Penn, and you're like, oh, wait, well, that's not a thing unless you're literally like this visualization. If you're taking that to be
completely literally,
yeah, completely literally, like you guys are flying around through this virtual space, like you're in essentially in a cockpit right now, flying around, and he's your co-pilot. Then it makes some sense, but even then, like, we know that's not a thing, so.
That was another part where I thought that the corporate lady's acting was just terrible, because he's like saying all this crazy stuff, and she's in the background being like, "Doctor, flu shot, what does this all mean?" I think she literally throws her hands up at one point because she's so like she doesn't understand.
Yeah,
and I was like, oh my god.
They do, like, that is a terrible character, because she is just like clueless the entire time, and she's just like going along with this guy, even though he also has like a pretty terrible plan. And
his plan is solid. It's just that he gets figured out. Like, so basically the plot is that like he put a worm into Ellingson Minerals thing, and it's just like scooping up. It's basically the plot of Office Space. It's a worm that takes like a couple of cents per transaction, and then he's just gonna go away with it. The only problem is he hid it in this one random garbage file, and it just so happens that their one inept friend who's trying to prove himself like hacks into that supercomputer and copies that specific file, and he knows that if the hackers like look at it too closely, he's gonna get found out.
Like, would they have frame of reference for knowing what that is, though? Yeah,
they do. They like that part where they get the garbage file and they're like trying to recreate it, and it's that montage where
I thought they only got like a fraction of it.
They got a fraction of it, but that's why there's that montage where it's going in fast motion and they're recreating it. They're building it based on what they have, and they're like eating pizza and dancing in fast motion in the background. They realize, like, I think it even is Dade who's like, wait a minute, this is a worm. And then everyone's like, oh, we know what a worm is. Let's tell the audience.
Well, yeah, but would they know that it was like, you know what I mean? Where it's like they could put 1, 2, 3, and 4 together and realize, this worm belonged to that guy, and he was trying to defraud this company of the money or whatever. Like, could they?
I think they literally say all that to the audience.
Why, they say it, but like, is that a thing that we think they could organically arrive at?
Well, because like they're like, oh, it's a worm, and then someone else is like, I wonder who wrote it. It's like a hacker wrote it, and then Dade is like, oh, I know who wrote it. It's this hacker that works there who's contacted me. And then someone's like, why did they contact you? And he's like, well, I'm Zero Cool. So it's like kind of a fluid series of events.
Sure. Well, I think my main thing was that what's his name? The Plague sort of like escalated the situation. Like, if he had done nothing, I feel like nothing would have happened, but he like 100%. Escalated the situation by like getting involved and going and confronting the guy, and
he is the architect of his own demise.
Exactly.
In some ways, though, I think he's trying to cover his tracks, because if there is a situation where someone figures out that they took a bunch of money, all of a sudden he stumbled upon the perfect fall guys, hackers, who there's already like this Agent Gill after them. So he's like, oh, I'll just make this common knowledge and blame it on them, and then I'll get away even more scot-free.
Yeah, it's one of those things where like I can buy it because it's believable enough. It's just also like a little bit of a stretch that they would do something so sort of crazy to begin with, but but yeah.
Another thing that I thought was weird, so there's that ending hacking montage where they get hackers from around the world to help them out, which was fine. But I don't know what Dade is wearing on his head. He puts this like extra screen. I had a Nerf gun back in the day that came with like a head visor that was supposed to help you. No, maybe it was a water gun actually. But yeah, he has this weird visor on, which I'm not sure what it is. And so when they're doing that spinning phone booth thing, he's just like, he looks like a cyborg.
What was that used for? Like, did he use it for anything?
I think they talk about it in the book, but I'm not sure what it was. It's like a secondary screen that has like codes on it or something. If you're interested, I can lend you the book. You can learn even more about this.
I'll pass. I'm good with, I don't know if I want to read the book, but the movie was entertaining. Have you seen Johnny Lee Miller or anything? I guess you know him from Elementary, but to me, he was Sick Boy in Trainspotting.
Yeah, I saw Trainspotting a very long time ago, and the only scene I remember is that scene where that guy wakes up and he's gone to the bathroom in that bed and he's trying to escape, but then he whips the sheet out and covers that whole family in his feces.
I mean, that was a year after this movie.
That's crazy. Wait, that was only a year after this?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, it seems crazy to me when I realized that Trainspotting was just a year after this movie.
Did you see the sequel to Trainspotting?
I did. That was like a year or two ago? It was a couple of years ago, actually.
It was recent, yeah. Was it good?
It was pretty good. I enjoyed it. It's a pretty good movie.
That was Guy Ritchie, right?
No, it's Danny Boyle.
Oh, that's right. I watched that King Arthur Guy Ritchie movie the other day, and it was actually pretty good.
You're kidding, right?
No, I like Guy Ritchie movies. Like, he made Sherlock.
Well, I know.
What was that called? Was that called Sherlock?
I think it's just Sherlock Holmes. I mean, I like those movies too, and I, in general, like Guy Ritchie, but I've heard nothing but bad things about that movie from not just from critics, but like people I know that have seen it. Everybody has sort of agreed that that's a terrible movie.
Really?
Yeah.
I was into it. Like, the effects were cool, and the main character I thought was interesting. I don't know. I thought it was like a good Dungeons and Dragons kind of escapade kind of a thing.
That might have been what they were going for. I know he was originally planning on making like a multi-movie series out of that, and it's not going to happen at this point because it bombed at the box office and got like just trashed by critics. So
I don't know if it's still the case, but I rented it on Google Play. It was on sale for like, usually movies are like $3.99 or whatever to rent, but it was on sale for $1.99, maybe because of the holidays. So I was like, yeah, I'll check it out, and I actually really enjoyed it.
I mean, maybe I'll watch it, but I've heard nothing.
Only watch it if it's on sale, because you might not like it.
Yeah, I'll see if it's at like Redbox or something. I've just heard nothing but bad things about it, so I've just avoided it up to now.
There's giant elephants in it.
Are there?
Yeah.
Like woolly mammoths?
No, bigger than that.
What? How is that?
It's the size of a mountain.
What?
Yeah, isn't that cool?
Is it supposed to be like based on a comic book or something?
There's just a bunch of magic in it. Like, I don't know if it comes across in the trailers, but there's like a ton of magic in this movie. There's also like one of the best montages I've seen in recent years is like when he's growing up from a boy to a man. There's a really cool Guy Ritchie montage with like good music. Sorry, we're supposed to be talking about hackers.
Yeah,
but
I
saw it recently.
We're really going off the rails here, but just out of curiosity, do you know what the director has done since, or the writer even, of Hackers? Because I'll tell you, the writer, his only two writing credits are Hackers and a movie in 1999 called The Rage, Carrie 2.
Oh, man. That sounds like something I don't want to see.
Yeah, exactly. And then the director has not done anything since 2015, but I think he's probably best known for Hackers and K-Pax and maybe The Skeleton Key.
I don't know what The Skeleton Key is.
I remember specifically The Skeleton Key because there was a poster hanging up in the offices of Double Feature Films where I interned in LA because they produced that movie. Which has nothing to do with anything other than we just happen to be talking about a movie that this guy also directed. But yeah, they've not gone on to great success after this movie, unfortunately. They probably maybe would have if they'd done Hackers too.
I mean, let's talk about that for a second. If we were going to make a Hackers 2, I think it would still have to be set in the 90s. It would have to be college years, because I feel like you can't make a modern day Hackers because like Google and Amazon exist, and like how would you need to be in that rough, scrappy early days of the internet where you can just like call someone up and ask them what their modem number is and like log into their system that way. Whereas now it's like I'm going to school for like IT stuff, and I don't know how you would make stuff interesting. I guess you could, I don't know. But I just like
if you come up with crazy visualizations, it'll work.
Oh, you know what you could... Oh, we're fools. The Millennium, Y2K. Hackers Y2K.
That's why didn't they do that? Honestly,
Why didn't they do that? Like, that's genius. There was so much stuff going on about like, oh, Y2K is going to be so crazy. That's the and they would have been. So this was 1995. So Y2K was 5 years later. So they would have been in college, maybe, or just out of college. So this would have been perfect.
I mean, the thing is, they didn't even necessarily need to stick with the same characters. Like, Hackers could have just been like a franchise that kept going, and maybe they have like the people could have formed sort of not necessarily like a club, but
DedSec. That's from Watch Dogs 2.
Well, that's what it could have been. Anyway, it could have.
I guess Watch Dogs 2 is a way to make Hackers 2. Like, they had the drones. Like, I would watch a movie version of Watch Dogs 2. That would be great, actually, because they handled like the Google stuff. Yeah.
That's what I was going to say when you're like, I don't think you could do a Hackers movie now. I was like, well, you could just do the movie version of Watch Dogs.
And you're right. That would be genius. Like, I would totally watch that because then it would have the tongue-in-cheek nature they have in Silicon Valley, but sort of more irreverent because they actually know what's going on and it's not like them constantly failing.
Yeah.
That would be a cool set. Maybe modern day is the way to go. I don't know. I like the nostalgia of Y2K, but modern day Hackers would also be pretty cool because you can incorporate, drone technology and self-driving cars, like that scene in. Oh, you haven't watched any Fast and Furious movies, have you?
No. Well, and the thing is, it would have just been like if they did it now, because there's more general knowledge on the subject. I feel like you could do it in almost a better, even more realistic way now than they could have gotten away with back then.
I agree, but I'm not sure. I don't know what the direction. The direction is either to go more realistic or to go more unrealistic, to make it slightly more tongue-in-cheek and comedic by doing it in Y2K and still making it like insane graphic user interfaces.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes movies do that where like it's sort of an alternate reality type of a future or even past where the technology has just sort of evolved on a different sort of path than the way it has for us. Like even to an extent, like Blade Runner 2049 or whatever the year it was, 2048. That movie, and even like if you go back and watch the original Blade Runner, which I think I'm trying to remember when that was originally set. It was 2018? No, I forget. Anyway. The point is, like, the reason why that's the future, but, like, technology seems different is because that universe's technology evolved along a different path than ours. Mm-hmm. And I think that's interesting. That's interesting to see how they, like, sort of concoct futuristic technology that just sort of originated along a different path than our current set of modern technology.
I would be into that. I mean, the visualization for what modern day technology looks like through the lens of Hackers would be crazy to see, and I would love to see that.
Yeah, and people are into like retro futuristic stuff that is like showing a possible future as sort of designed or imagined through the eyes of somebody from like the 60s or 70s or even 80s, Did you
ever see Paycheck?
Yeah.
That's a good example of just like weird technology because it takes place kind of in the future-ish. So he has like these weird computers he's working on, like weird little like personal gadgets, because I don't think there are cell phones in that movie.
I don't remember much about that movie.
That's another thing. Cell phones aren't in this movie. They all have beepers.
Yeah, which if people like who grew up with like cell phones go back and watch this movie now, what's a beeper?
I mean, so many weird little idiosyncrasies about this film. There are cool things you can do. Like I'm trying to think of like modern day. There's that cool montage where they're like prepping and he's like getting all of his floppy disks ready to go and stuff. And there's stuff today you can like do crazy stuff and make a little hacking device with Raspberry Pis and whatnot. So like. Yeah. You could make cool props for a modern day Hackers movie that would be like prop forums would probably be all over, but I don't know. I still can't decide if I want it to be Y2K or if I want it to be modern times Watch Dogs 2.
I mean, games are starting to get movies based on them. Like recently it's starting to happen where companies are announcing all these movies based on video games. Do you think eventually somebody will do Watch Dogs the movie?
Well, so that's what I was going to say is, like, my dream is for Watch Dogs 2 to be the movie, but what a weird thing that would be if a sequel to a game got a movie and not the original movie. And I don't really want an Aiden Pierce movie because I feel like he's not an interesting character.
Well, so that's the thing is I think the second one was known to be a better story with better characters. So I feel
100%.
like if they were going to like work with the developer of that game and be like, we're going to make a movie out of this, I feel like that would be the starting ground.
Oh my God. I would be so jacked for that movie just because they have a cool little like hideout under that comic book shop. And he's got all those like little gadgets and gizmos, and it's set in a cool area. Like, man, I really want a Watch Dogs 2 movie now. It was basically a sequel to Hackers. Like, they are just like another group of scrappy kids going up against like big government and big data and whatnot. So it kind of is already a sequel to Hackers. But I don't know. Does watching this make you nostalgic for playing that game, or does it give you a more of an appreciation for that game?
I mean, I never played the Watch Dogs games.
What?
You don't remember?
I thought we played them together.
No, you may have played them with Mike, but
I did play them with Mike.
I never played them. So I wanted to play the first Watch Dogs, but I was like too busy at the time to do it. But I did watch like somebody stream quite a bit of it, and so I was like, nah, I'm good on this game now.
Zach, you should definitely pick up Watch Dogs 2.
I bet it's pretty cheap these days, but
I mean, I bet you can get it in a bin at Walmart. It's sold for like $20. I bet. Actually, hold on a second. I'm gonna go on Amazon right now and see what it is for PS4. $36 right now. You can get it used for $28. Actually, no, more buying options. You can get it for $15.
I just want to know what like the Steam price is.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, because you have that beefy PC.
I just want to know if it's like, because they
had so many cool things
time.
As well. Like they did such cool, interesting character design for him because his like, you know how in Hackers, Kate Libby's subway defense mechanism is that flare gun and she uses it at one point?
I don't remember that part.
They're like in that dumpster diving for passwords. And then someone's like, hey, what's going on there? And she pulls out a flare gun. Anyway.
Right.
In Watch Dogs, he has a cool thing that's like an 8-ball that he's drilled a hole in and put a bungee cord on, and he like whips that around, and that's his like mechanism for like stealth kills and whatnot. He also has a cool bag and like everything about his character design is like very interesting.
Like what you're describing is like a better version of Hackers because you're describing something more specific where like we know this character is good at this. But like in Hackers, they're just like, this guy's good at hacking, but like there's not really a given, like they don't quantify that. Like there's no way for me to point to this guy's specifically good at this one thing, you know?
Well, no. So the Phantom Freaker, he's good at telephone stuff. And then Lord Nikon has the memory. Serial Killer is homeless. So I don't know if that's an ability he has.
Did they do anything with that in the final battle, though? Because I don't remember if they do or not. They might. I just
Lord
don't
Nikon
remember.
does. Lord Nikon does that thing where he's delivering flowers and he's like getting a bunch of passwords and he's like, man, I got like 40 or 50 passwords in my brain. I feel like it's going to explode. So he uses his special ability, but I don't think anybody else does. Phantom Freak is still in jail, I'm pretty sure.
Was he the one that had the photographic memory or was that somebody else?
Lord Nikon had the photographic memory.
Okay. It has been a while since I watched it, but when I was writing my notes for this, I was like, it would have been so awesome if this was more like an Ocean's 11 type of a thing, where it was like everybody had their own specific skill and they had to sort of, I don't know, if they had a much more specific way of laying out the plan, it was like more clearly defined, and everybody's role in that, the hacking was also very well defined. And it didn't sort of turn into like an, MTV music video where it's like he's like spinning around in circles or the camera's like spinning around him and it like fades. So you're also seeing like that visualization of like flying around in the virtual space at the same time.
Well, I think that's a symptom of like the screenwriters and the world at large not knowing enough about computers at the time to like have variation other than just like the verb hacking.
So I read Ebert's review of the movie as well, and
did he like it?
He did. He gave it 3 out of 4 stars. He said that he has no doubt that the movie is deeply dubious in the computer science department. And he says it shares the common hacksploitation conceit that a kid with a computer and a modem can alter the course of human events with a few taps on his keyboard. I don't know. He was mostly positive on it, which I think is counter to most of the critical reception for the movie. I think it was fairly mixed. But one of the things I like about Ebert is that he was typically more open to stuff that a lot of critics would have just like disregarded, and this movie is a good example of that. But yeah,
I don't know if I have anything other. I mean, all I have to say is positive. This gets like 5 out of 5 stars, 2 thumbs up from me. How would you rate this movie?
I mean, I'd probably give it 4 stars. Like, I know it's got flaws, especially like I said about how it sets up this like romance type of thing. Like the first half is very dedicated to like the high school and like the love interest like being set up, and she's like got a boyfriend and how's he gonna deal with that. And then like the second half of the movie is almost exclusively dealing with like the like tech hacking situation. And so by the end of the movie they're just like get this guy out of here. They're together now and it's fine. And so it just sort of, some of that feels a little bit disconnected. So I take maybe some points off for that, but otherwise, I think his exit from the film is like, they start talking about her computer and he's like, Kate, you going into this computer stuff again? And she's like, yeah, just a second. He's like, whatever. And then he leaves seemingly the state because he's never seen again. Yeah, well, I didn't read into that he was like, I'm done with you because all you care about is computers. Like,
goodbye forever.
Literally, they just needed one line and that would have like solved all the problems there. But also, I guess I like how at the end they like hack the lights on the buildings to say crash and burn because that's their like
so good.
Their hacker names. But yeah, I enjoyed it quite a bit. I think it's an entertaining movie, and we might be blinded a little bit by nostalgia and love of computer things, but I think it's a fun movie.
You know how we should follow this up is we should do your favorite movie and that I haven't seen.
Oh gosh. I'm going to have to think on that one.
Isn't it something by Wong Kar-wai, like Chungking Express or something?
Yeah. I mean, have you not seen any Wong Kar-wai movies?
Zach, I've seen the best Wong Kar-wai
Oh, that's
movie.
right.
You know that.
Every time we talk about it. The only Wong Kar-wai movie you've seen is the one that's generally accepted to be the only bad Wong Kar-wai movie, and it's the...
That's correct.
My Blueberry Nights, the one that was...
so good.
So, like, he's a Hong Kong filmmaker, and the one movie he made in English that was, like, completely lost in translation is the only movie of his you've seen.
I don't remember anything about that movie except that, like, a bunch of scenes were bookended by just like very close-up shots of pies being slowly squished, I think, or just like pressed up against the screen. Also, after I watched that movie, I used to work in a movie theater and we screened it, so it was like 2 a.m. by the time we got out because we watched it after the theater closed. We went down to the parking garage and someone was breaking into my friend's car, and then so we had to like wait for the cops to come, and they didn't get anything, but they like smashed his window. So I forever remember finishing My Blueberry Nights, walking down the stairwell being like, man, that was garbage. And then hearing like glass break and then rushing down to see people like running from his car.
That's not ideal circumstances. I've only seen that movie once, and I don't really remember it very well because it's been a long time, but it's...
Well, you should pick a favorite movie, and we should watch that next, and we'll do a kind of a...
We should...
An old movie.
I do enjoy talking about movies, so we should definitely do more of these.
For sure.
If you enjoyed our discussion, give us a like and leave us a comment. Tell us how you felt about hackers. And if you're listening to this on our podcast feed, you could always leave us a review if you're on Apple Podcasts. And yeah, we'll catch you on the next one.
We'll see you later. Hack the planet.
Hack the planet. Goodbye.
Goodbye.